And switching over, we are live. There we go.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're super happy to have you join us this Friday afternoon. If you're in the northern part of the country, you're probably part of this crazy snowstorm we're all getting. So hopefully you're bundled up. If you're not getting snow, very lucky to you. Hopefully you are home and safe and ready to kick off the weekend. We are honored this evening to have Thom Dick with us. And I am going to turn the mic over to Doc and Tom and kick back and enjoy the stories.
Good evening, everyone. Tom, thanks for joining us this evening. It's really great to have you here. I've known your work for many, many years. You and I, although I don't think either one of us remember exactly where, but we bumped into each other at one conference or another somewhere out in the western part of the United States. Maybe Salt Lake City. Maybe that was one where we bumped into.
Oh yeah, that was a great conference.
Great conference, yeah. But anyway, our guest this evening is Thom Dick. He is a legendary author in the world of emergency medical services. And we're going to sort of walk through his history in EMS, how he got into doing this. And I think that story is fascinating. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the direction of the articles he has written over the years and why they were so important. So Tom, take me back to you were in college and you saw an ad. Tell me about that.
I was a journalism major at San Diego State, and I worked full-time as an electrician at the time, so it took me 7.5 years to get through college. While I was working on my BA, I ran out of electives during my junior year and saw an ad in a newspaper for ambulance attendants, no experience necessary. I couldn't work as a journalism because in the trades you had to be able to work 8 to 5 days a week. And so I signed up as an ambulance attendant. All it required was an advanced first aid card, and I got one of those in my health class as an underclassman at San Diego State. And my very first day, I had a 5-patient auto accident. I was being interviewed wearing a suit, and my boss said, "We're out of ambulances. We have one more ambulance, and I need somebody to crew it." So I said, "I don't know." And that's all I got out of my mouth. And he took me downstairs and introduced me to a guy named John Elliott, who was cleaning his ambulance. He was waxing the roof. And he says, "This is Tom. Here's the smock, Tom. John will show you the ropes." And so we transported in a Stoner Chevy, which was a high-top Chevy Suburban. We transported 2 patients hung from the roof, 1 patient on the cot, 1 patient on the bench, and 1 patient sitting up facing me. And I rode the rail. I hung on the rack on the ceiling all the way to the hospital. Couldn't do anything, had never seen an oxygen tank, had never touched an ambulance before or been in one. And we transported for 38 miles to a little neighborhood hospital called College Park. And at the time there was no interagency radio system. So we called our dispatcher, told him we're en route to College Park. They called College Park and said, "We have 5 patients from an MVA motor vehicle accident coming in from Crest," which was up in the mountains. And so in those days, what somebody would do is they'd get on the PA system at the hospital. Usually it was a clerk, a volunteer, and she would say, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And that's where that expression actually came from. And a doctor would meet us in the ER, and it was just a room. And so would the director of nursing or the nursing supervisor for that shift. And she would unlock the emergency department. The emergency departments were kept locked because that way people couldn't steal drugs. And that was my introduction into EMS. Scared the living hell out of me. And I was there for a 24-hour shift that day. And I didn't love it at first because I was so scared. But after, I would say, maybe a couple of weeks, I started to wonder, is this what I'm really cut out to do? It seemed, I don't know, I think it requires talent to work in an ambulance or in an ER. And if you're not born with it, that can be very difficult. Not impossible, but very difficult. If you are born for it, it can seem like the most natural, most comfortable, most reasonable thing you could ever want to do with your life. And that was my introduction to what was not called EMS in those days. It was just called the ambulance service.
Right.
And police and fire departments generally wanted nothing to do with it.
Yep.
So it was us and the police department and the fire department. We all considered each other different. But that was how I got my start. And that was in 1971. And I worked for that ambulance service for a year. And then I needed to get some time off for my wedding. I couldn't get time off for my wedding, so I quit. And after my honeymoon, I came back home and went to work for their competitor. And I forgot to tell Dr. Clincy, there were 5 people in my wedding who were supposed to be working on ambulances for the service that couldn't give me time off. And the manager and the owner had to work ambulances for 24 hours that day. They weren't very happy.
Maybe they got a little better appreciation for what they were asking others to do.
Maybe. They weren't bad guys. They were nice guys.
Yep.
But they just weren't thinking straight, I guess.
So from there, you then went to, what service did you go to in San Diego?
I went to Hartson's, which was a family-owned service that insisted on double blankets in cold weather, being polite to people, all people. They were very fussy who they hired. And to keep their crews in a good mood, they provided us with lunch every day, which was the busiest part of the transfer day. So they would fill a station wagon with refrigerators and food that was made in their kitchen, and they deliver lunch to each crew based on a menu that they filled out of their preferences when they applied for a job.
Wow.
And they did a lot of things like that to make us friendlier, not by bribery, but just they were fussy who they hired, and they were careful how they took care of us. And we always had really nice equipment. Every 3,000 miles, every ambulance was taken off the road and put in the air and inspected. You didn't have any mechanical problems. You just knew you weren't going to have any mechanical problems. Really top of the line equipment and so on. It was a very nice place to work.
They took really good care of you as employees.
They took really good care of us, and I worked there for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad I did. I learned a lot. I really learned a lot.
Now, from Hartson's, which sounds like it was a pretty good place to work because they had a really good reputation, by the way. When I had an opportunity to do some work out at the Bud School, I got familiar with the Hartson's ambulance service when I was in San Diego, and it had a hell of a reputation, I'll tell you that. From there, then you went to where?
I went to Bay General Hospital, who put me through paramedic school. I worked for Hartson's part-time while I was a paramedic, and the hospital full-time, and I loved working for that hospital. The medical director of the ER was a guy named Mel Oakes. And he was very fussy about how you took care of patients. He wanted you to use their names. He wanted you to keep them warm and comfortable. And that was hardwired into me already. And he reinforced that while I worked there. Then Hartson got their own paramedics. Bay General contracted with Hartson. They really didn't want to be in the paramedic. Bay General really didn't want to be in the paramedic business. They contracted Hartson's to provide the service in Chula Vista, which was where Bay General was. And I worked for Hartson as a paramedic for another 10 years. And then I got a job offer as a quality manager in the Denver system. And I've been living in Colorado since 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And worked for two systems here.
And that was when you started to work for Pridemark then, when you moved out toward the Denver area?
Pridemark, yeah,
right.
For 4 years. And then my final employer was Platte Valley Medical Center here in Brighton, Colorado, which is a bedroom community for Brighton. It's the farthest east hospital in Denver, and so we cover a big section of the plains, probably for 100 miles, and had a great experience there. Had a great boss named Carl Kragel, who's still there. He's the chief. I was the assistant chief. Had wonderful people. We never had to recruit. We had a waiting list that was probably about 30 people long.
Wow.
Who wanted to work there. Pridemark was that way too.
Yeah.
And thoroughly enjoyed my experience there.
Excellent. When did you start your writing career as it impacted the EMS world?
Shortly after I became a paramedic, I sent a query letter, which is like a proposal for an article,
Sure.
to the editor of Emergency Magazine, which was owned by Dynamed.
Right.
And the guy who was the managing editor there was a guy named Keith Griffiths. And after they published the article, Keith called me up one day and he said, "Let's go to lunch." So I met him at Carol's Restaurant in San Diego. We had lunch and he said, "Where'd you go to school?" And I had gone to journalism school, and Keith had too. And Keith wanted to know where I learned to write. And so I told him, "Well, I used to be the editor of the Daily Aztec at San Diego State." He says, "I was too." And so that kind of began a friendship. He said, "You ever heard of Jim Page?" And I said, "Jim Page is my idol." At the time, Jim was the technical director for Emergency, the TV series.
Right.
And Jim had a feel for EMS that went beyond the fire service. He felt the same way about taking care of sick people that I did, and that Keith did, and a lot of other really good people that I got a chance to work with. I learned way more from them than they ever learned from me. It was absolute pleasure to work for them. And Keith said, "We're starting this magazine called Gems. Would you be interested in working with me?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." So I was one of the first 4 people at Gems. It was Keith's mom, Vivian, who did all the paperwork, Jim, and me. And I worked for Gems for about 20 years, part-time. and learned a whole lot. When they started their conferences, EMS Today conferences, I started traveling around the country and meeting paramedics from other places. And by far, the most interesting of those paramedics were paramedics from other countries. And so EMS Today and EMS World, which is sponsored by EMS Magazine,
Right.
EMS World, both of those conferences attract 30,000 people today from all over the world. And there's no experience in the world like sitting in a restaurant with 12 other people, some of them proudly wearing their uniforms for their agencies in countries far, far away.
Yep.
And finding out we all laugh about the same stuff. We all care about the same stuff. We all wonder about the same stuff. They're just like us. We're just like them, only they speak better English than we speak French or whatever.
One thing that I found fascinating about Jim Page, he was a great fisherman. And by that, I mean, he would have those cocktail parties at EMS Today where you get an invitation. Those invitations were never by accident. He would take you off in a corner and say, "Oh, by the way, I'd like you to do this or this or this." And he was a master at that as well, of bringing those of us that really had EMS in our heart into the fold with him. And it was great to know him that way.
Yeah.
Now, over the years, you've written a lot. And I think what strikes me most about your writing is the same thing that makes Kate Derniker and I good friends. You speak to the people aspects of what we do as opposed to just the technical aspects of what we do. How would you like to tell me more about that and the slant of a lot of your writing over the years?
We talked a little bit earlier before the broadcast about talent, and I don't mean talent in a bragging sense, but talent in the sense of a feel for serving others. And if you have that, EMS is one of a number of things you could do with your life that seem like the most natural, most comfortable, most reasonable thing in the world you could do with your life. And that's what I found about EMS, is it made everything fit. So much so, I forgot all about being a journalist and became an ambulance driver, EMT, paramedic. And I really, truly loved my work. I didn't love it every day because I wasn't a machine. And you meet some people who are just guaranteed to piss you off. But most people are just people. Yep. And in the news today, you don't hear much about those people. You hear about the ones who rise to positions of power and ones who don't know how to behave themselves and ones who make a lot more money than they can ever spend. But, realize most people are actually pretty nice. And when they're having the worst day of their life, they really need somebody who can dial in on that and treat them with some modicum of dignity and intelligence. And if you have that, you are going to love EMS, in my opinion.
And that has come through in a lot of your writing. And you made the comment that you weren't a journalist, you went over and got into EMS. I beg to differ with you. You have been an exceptional journalist in terms of what you have contributed to our profession over the years.
That's really kind of you. I really appreciate it.
I look
Thanks.
to some of your articles over the years have made me laugh. Some of them have brought a tear to my eye. Um, when I really want to laugh, then I'll go over and look at some of Steve Barry's stuff. I'm not an ambulance driver, but
Yeah.
uh, what you mentioned somebody that we both know, Nancy Perry.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
what strikes you about what made Nancy so exceptional? Because these are some of these people you and I knew and know. Most of the kids today don't even know who we're talking about, or what they contributed. So tell me a little bit about your experience with Nancy.
Nancy was the managing editor of EMS World, which was formerly called EMS Magazine,
Right.
uh, under two separate publishers. She was the managing editor of that journal for at least 30 years that I know of, and probably longer. Um, and she is a natural writer who went to Columbia School of Journalism, and is a super journalist. And I didn't know her at all until she called one day and we talked about an article she was working on. Um, and I think she's very, very intelligent. I think she works for one of the fire journals now. No, one of the police journals now. But we became really good friends. And I think she is probably one, she and Keith Griffiths are probably the two top EMS journalists I've ever met in my life or heard of. They're both very good interrogators, investigators. They can talk to any old buddy any old time, and they're both excellent, excellent, classically trained writers with a lot of world experience. That's just my opinion, anyway.
Well, I would agree with you, but I'd put you in a class with them as well.
Ah,
Uh,
that's really kind of you. I learned
uh,
a lot from both of them.
yeah, but your stuff has been on point very, very often,
Oh,
and um, it's we've been fortunate recently at the museum to get an entire collection of EMS journals. Who did we get those from? Let me see. Oh, we got them from you. Uh, and just so you know what we are doing with them, we're having all of them digitized, and they will be made available to any researcher that wants to research a subject on EMS for as long as we've had these publications floating around. And that, I think, in terms of a contribution that we're going to make to the profession and to the growth of the profession, may be one of the most valuable things we're going to do for a long time to come. So we will protect your collection for sure. Um, I want to thank you on behalf of the museum board for your contribution. It's terrific. Um, when Christy called me and said, "Oh, by the way, Thom Dick wants to give us," and she sent me a picture of the place you had all these magazines stored. And I said, "Wow, that's very cool." so, so
that's really kind of you. Thank you very much, both
well,
very much.
we're going to take very good care of that collection, and hopefully through digitization, we're going to be able to make it more widely available to people. Because
Oh, good.
unfortunately, guys like me keep the last 3 or 4 issues around, tear out an article now and then, and the rest of it goes into recycling. Um, you didn't do that. And that's extremely beneficial to the profession, by the way, I might add, uh, because there's there are things that you and I talked about earlier, and you mentioned a little while ago, that some people just can't even comprehend. What one of the things you mentioned, your first call with 5 patients in the back of an ambulance. Sometimes those of us that have been in this business for a while will talk about the bus. Well, the reason it became the bus is because occasionally we had a busload of people in the back of one ambulance. Um, so that kind of thing. And having to get a night watchman to open the door to the hospital so you could take a patient in. These are things just today are unheard of. You've got 24-hour, 24/7 emergency room coverage. We got a doctor there all the time, or doctors, plural, or trauma surgeons in the case of a trauma center. In the beginning, when you and I started this stuff, um, I started a little younger than you did. I started when I was 16. Um, we would throw patients in a Stokes basket, threw them in the back of the 57 police wagon with an E&J resuscitator and some board splints and say, get us to White Plains Hospital, because we didn't know what we were doing. We were firemen. We weren't ambulance guys. So, yeah,
You know, Mike Tagman started when he was 16 also.
yep,
Home backed up against a fire station, and he used to hang around this fire station until they got tired of seeing him, and eventually he talked them into letting him ride with them, and he became a volunteer, and the rest, as they say, is history. But
yeah,
Mike has a very similar background.
yeah, yeah. I started at 14, just hanging out. I was a junior firefighter. And then when I had a driver's license and was 16, then I became a volunteer in the department. In those days, you could do it at 16.
Yeah,
When I got out of college, then I was a paid firefighter and then went
yeah,
into the Navy. And, the rest, as they say, is history.
yeah.
But I am thrilled to have that collection because it will put so much of what we do into perspective for so many people, particularly when we look at modern EMS. We're
Right.
also doing a lot taking us back to military medicine and how it's impacted what we do, and then take us back to the Civil War and to the Revolutionary War. That's where EMS really started. When I mentioned this to somebody earlier today, I said, history of EMS in this country started in the American Revolution. And wasn't quite what it is today, but that's when we really started.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Tom, it's been great to be with you this evening. I'm honored to have had a chance to chat with you, and I'm thrilled about the collection that you donated to the museum. I think people will be delighted to get their hands on it and be able to research this information down the road. And here is my trusty associate, Christy Van Hoven, my director, and she's my director in more ways than one. I think they gave me the title of president just to give me a title, but Christy really runs the joint. Christy, over
Well,
to you.
thank you so much for inviting me, and it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, sir. Great to have you.
If you're up for it, do you have one piece of advice for students entering the profession today?
For students entering the profession,
Today, yep.
don't be in a hurry to become somebody's boss, and don't be in a hurry to become a paramedic. Be an EMT for at least 2 years. At least 2 years. And it'll teach you if you like doing it or not. It'll teach you if you love doing it or not. And if you don't love being an EMT, please don't become a paramedic.
Excellent.
I love it.
Well, thank you. That is fantastic. I have to paraphrase what you said earlier before we started broadcasting, in that caring for the patient, the person, is foremost in your practice. And I think that's another great thing, that we all remember that we're treating people, not just bones or blood or guts coming from the
That's right.
museum
That's right.
gal. Thank you so much. I do actually have a surprise for everybody that's tuned in. If technology works with me tonight, we can take a sneak peek at our new online research archives. The full collection that you donated to us is not quite in there because we're still slogging through. It's a slow process to digitize. But
I'm sorry.
yeah, it's quite all
Oh,
right. It's a burden
don't be
I'm willing
sorry.
to bear, but I know everybody's ready to get researching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with any luck, and I guess give you a peek at my Facebook page here because I forgot to switch over. And we'll take a quick peek at the digital library here. So anybody visiting emsmuseum.org will see the virtual museum here, and underneath that is our digital library and archives. And then we have a wonderful array of catalogs to choose from. So from our 3D collections to our archival collections, you can just kind of click on what you're interested in. Our archives pops up here. And eventually, it's going to show all the collections we have. And as we digitize them, we'll add pictures and notes and finding aids. So you see some are yet to be filled out, but we are working ahead here. And of course, Tom, you're at the bottom now, but we're working very hard to get your collection into the archives. And
That's
we
okay.
have some volunteers do some research already. So we have a couple of other research buttons here where there's kind of a sneak peek into our collection. So I promised people online have been asking, when do we get to start researching at the museum? And the answer is start now. We'll keep adding pages, hopefully every week as we get stuff sent to us. If you have anything to share, please share with us. Otherwise, that's our sneak peek of our new research center. So
thanks so much for
being
doing that,
the
Christy. Thanks so much for doing that.
Yeah, well, we appreciate all the work you've done. And just a few people reaching out online saying hi, and you're an inspiration. And I think you're going to have lots of visitors to Brighton once we're all allowed to travel again, because we all want to have.
I'll look forward to seeing them. Okay. Thanks so much for inviting me tonight. Thank you. Very nice to meet you again.
And we'll catch you all tomorrow night. We have a second Coffee with Doc tomorrow, and we'll post all the details online shortly. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you all.